Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome to our last session of the Ramadan series. My name is Ahsaan Rizvi, and this will be our last session for this year. There will be another program at this very time slot tomorrow. But let's get started with our session today. Thank you for being present in all the sessions before, and hopefully you were able to learn and understand some of the concepts that I was trying to teach. Today. This is the last, like I said, and the fifth session of the series, and I will give a quick recap as well of what we studied last in the last session, so we can actually connect with our lecture today. So, as you know, we were trying to understand the concept or existence, if there is any, of God or an independent existence, um, and we wanted to do that by building a logical framework. So there were really four things that we were actually going through. Number one was need of a classification. So we said that, okay, if we want to understand an existence, we need to build a certain model, a certain classification. And then we said, okay, so a classification, and like we discussed in our last session, is actually needed. So you can define objects and place them into a category, because it's very difficult to go to each and every object in the world and then identify each and every object separately, right? It's much easier to have a general group where we can actually place all the common properties, where you can identify the common properties of objects and throw them in that bucket. So that means you can actually classify or somewhat uniquely identify those object types into a group. And so the best or the simplest form of classification is binary classification, where you just put objects into two groups. One is A, the other one is non A, right? Now, we actually did that. We were able to define two groups. One was a dependent object, and the other one was independent object. So we were able to actually define the properties of the dependent object. So we said that, let's say we are dependent objects, and then what is our properties? Because we know ourselves, we know we should be able to define our properties as well in a fairly standard way. So one of them is needy. We are dependent on food to live. We need to breathe. We need water to keep ourselves hydrated, right? So we are needy. Number two is that we are created. We did not create ourselves. We were created by someone. Then we know that, right? And number three was we can die. We can, our life ends, so we can be destroyed. Number four is we build of matter. We occupy space. We have volume. We have mass. So we basically have matter. And last but not the least is that we also said that we are bounded by time and space. We are in space. We need space to exist. We need time, a sense of time, so that we can say, oh, yes, okay, we are time bound. We were born at such and such time. We died at such and such time. So we are basically bound by time. So this was the class of dependent beings. The other one was simply independent beings, where we said, okay, all the things that we mentioned were the properties of dependent beings will not be part, or will actually be not true for the independent beings. So independent beings should not be needy. They should be able to live without breathing or having food, or they should not have a need to sleep. And number two was they should not have been created. They should not have been, there shouldn't be someone who would create that entity. Number three is they cannot be destroyed. They should not have an end, in other words. Number four, they shouldn't be matter, right? They cannot be touched. And then number five is time and space. They should not have any restriction or limit whatsoever regarding time and space. And then we went over four possibilities. We said, okay, there are only four possibilities. Logically, there are only four possibilities. There cannot be any other fifth possibility. So we only study those four possible. What are those? Like, okay, both dependent and independent can exist simultaneously. Both cannot exist simultaneously, or one of them can exist. So these were the only four possibilities. Now, we crossed out the two possibilities, which were that dependent beings do not exist. Why? Because we know that we exist. We can feel our presence. We can see that we are here in this world. So we said, okay, dependent beings do not exist. Dependent beings do exist. So the zeros, the first one here and the second one here, we can cross out these two possibilities. The only possibilities that remain are then that independent being does not exist and independent being does exist, right? And the difference is that dependent beings definitely exist because we know that we are present, but we just want to make sure whether the independent beings exist or not. So that's what we were actually trying to that's where we left off in the last section. So we know that dependent beings exist. This is how we were able to cross out the other two. And this is the second one. This is the second proof. We just need to make sure whether independent beings exist or not, whether independent beings is a zero or one. Zero meaning they do not exist, one meaning they do exist. But I can also say this statement in a different way. I can say, oh, dependent beings cannot exist without independent. Now think about this for a second. So what I'm trying to say is that, okay, if I'm able to prove, we already know that dependent beings exist, but if I am able to prove that the existence of dependent beings is actually basically the existence of the dependent beings relies on the existence of independent beings. If I am able to prove that statement, that simply means that independent beings exist too, right? So let's see, is this really the case? Now there could be, if only, so let's go to that scenario in which we are saying that no, um, uh, dependent beings exist without an independent being, okay, which is the opposite of what we're trying to prove. So if only dependent beings exist, that means there is no independent body that exists. If only dependent beings exist, there could be two scenarios. One of them is known as linear dependency, which means, oh, okay, so A would exist only if B exists. B is also another dependent being. All A, B, C, and D linearly are dependent on each other for existence, and there's no independent entity whatsoever in which is creating them. Now, if we talk about this theory, then we see that, okay, A will only be created when B is created, B will only be created when C is created, and so on and so forth. And this chain could go on forever and forever, because we need, this will go to infinity, because this can never ever happen. Like, when will this chain ever end? There will always be a need of a certain someone to be present so that the entire chain could be created. But since the dependent beings are created, this is not possible. So this chain would, that means, would eventually go to infinity, and hence no one will ever exist, right? So just try to absorb this concept. What I'm trying to say is, let's say if a certain person is dependent for its existence on something else, which is also dependent on something else, and then that goes on and on, nothing will ever be in existence. So this is the concept of linear dependency, and we sort of kind of prove from this that dependent beings, the existence is actually dependent on something which is independent of this life circle of life. The other one is cyclic dependency. Let's say we just have four. This one is relatively simpler to understand. Let's see, we have only three objects, A, B, C, and A. So we are saying, oh, A can only exist if B exists, and C can only exist if it goes back to A if A exists. Now we know that A is dependent on B, and B cannot be there until C is there. But C will not be there until A is there. So, this circle will just keep on revolving, and nothing will ever exist. So even this cannot be true. Now, these two concepts basically tell us that if dependent beings are existing, then there has to be a power, an entity which is independent of this system, which is independent of this frame of reference. And that is what we can label as an independent existence. Thus, we are able to prove that if independent beings exist, there is uh, a necessity for the independent being to be existing. Thus, we can actually cross out this one as well, this possibility where the dependent exists and independent does not, because we have now proven that independent existence is actually necessary for the existence of dependent beings. Hence, the only possibility that is true out of all these four is the last one, which says that dependent and independent objects or beings both exist simultaneously. We don't know about the number. We can have multiple dependents. We can have multiple independent beings. According to this theory, right? We still need to go further and enhance an understanding, but this is what it's saying is we've been able to prove that there is for one independent being or multiple, there has to be at least one independent or multiple independent beings. The concept of unity of God is basically beyond the scope for now, um, but at least we've been able to logically prove the existence of both of these object types. The first cause fallacy is sometimes thrown into this concept or this logical framework where people say, oh, okay, you know what? Um, you have proven that independent and independent both are existing at the same time, but now you're saying that dependent beings, um, how were they created, right? They needed a creator. What about the independent beings? If or how did they come into being? Then they need, but we need to remind ourselves of the properties. When we were actually building that logical framework, we said that that a dependent being is actually created that needs a creator, but we said the object type which is falling in the other class of independent beings do not need a creator. They do not have a beginning, they do not have an end. So we defined those properties from the get-go and then build our understanding. So when someone tells you that everything has a cause, which is, this is a statement which is thrown around casually, we do believe that everything has a cause. That's how we actually science, or that's how we actually prove that everything, like a watch will have a watchmaker, a car will have a car manufacturer, right? Everything is a cause. Everything is being created by a certain someone. But does it necessarily mean that if everything has a cause, then God will also have it too? We say no, because he belongs to this second category, which does not need a creator. So that is the answer to that question. Now, this was the logical framework, really, and I wanted to start off with that, but we will talk about three other ways in which we want to study how the existence of an independent being is practical or truthful or not, right? So um, we have three ways. One of them is through the science of creation. So we see creations all around. So that is one way to look at. We can see if there are creations and we think there is some system in place that is perfect and all that, so that could be covered by that. Number two is through built-in and innate rational. Every person, every human being has that inner feeling, and we'll talk about it later on as well, what that really means. And then through logic. So this is going to be a quick logical concept that we will try to get our heads wrapped around. So let's get started with all these three concepts through science. So we have two postulates to make this case here. And postulate number one is there is a precise order. There is order in everything. Sun goes up, it sets in, and then there is like a predetermined time. Nothing is in chaos. Everything is the way it's supposed to be. The day, the setting of the day, the setting of the night. We look at the solar system. We look at the stars. They're telling us something. We look at all these things. Science tells us that there's so much system in everything. Biologically, in a human body, the anatomy of humans is systematic. It's orderly. There is like a plan in place to make sure that the universe is operating at its optimum. If anything were to dysfunction, everything will be chaotic. Um, the second one is every precise order needs a precise and vice versa. So we understand postulate number one. We can see it in everyday life, but then we are saying that that can only happen if there is a planner, if there is a moderator, right? How can a discussion be moderated without a moderator? If there is no moderator, then that discussion or debate would probably be not moderated, right? Uh, it would be chaotic if, let's say, there is no leader in a team. Can that team still function with that same discipline? Um, so based on that understanding, we say that logically, we must conclude that the world has that precise planner, that regulator, that that force that is keeping everything in its right position, that is just, that is fair, in making sure that everything is doing what it's supposed to do. I have a verse from the Holy Quran here, and I'm just going to read the translation because we are running behind on time. So I'm going to read the translation. It's chapter number 41, verse number 53. And Allah Ta'ala says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, we will show them our signs in the horizons and within themselves until it becomes clear to them that is the truth. But is it not sufficient concerning your law that He is over all things a witness? Now, again, this is basically a very good summary and a conclusion of what we're trying to understand, what we mentioned in our postulates 1 and 2, where we were saying that, okay, Allah Ta'ala is saying that just analyze, just contemplate on things around yourself and see whether it can be what it is without a creator, without someone planning it, without someone having wisdom behind it. Can it be even possible? And so this is witness. He is, Allah Ta'ala is himself saying that He is over all things that He created, is a witness. Now, we've seen some of the examples are, if you look on the left hand side, you can see a DNA. It's a complex structure, and a human genome basically contains about 3 billion base pairs of DNA. Now imagine the complexity uh, of that structure in itself. It's so small, and yet they're just such a huge number of DNAs in a human genome, right? And that's just one example of what is inside our human body, and that just goes to show how a creator, a force behind it, all this is really, really necessary and logical. The other thing is look at the solar system. Like I said, everything is in place at the right distance, and moving around the axis at the right precise time and time and distance. Now, if Earth was a little closer to the sun, it will be boiling hot. If it were a little further away from the sun, it would be frozen, and then life wouldn't exist. So basically, that precision tells us that someone was there to actually place it in that right position and place. Now, let's go on to the second way of looking at it, which is the intrinsic proof. And we said it has something to do with our internal feelings. It has something to do with how we feel internally. Now, every human being has that internal connection, right? And that really demonstrates or manifests itself when we are in the toughest of times, when we are facing a hardship. There is always that tiny bit spark of hope. There is this tiny moment, or there is this small small light of positivity in our hearts that tells us that we need to keep going, we cannot give up, and we need to work harder to actually overcome that obstacle. And so basically there is an anecdote about this as well. And an atheist actually walked up to Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam, our sixth Imam, once, and asked him, how can I know whether or not a God exists or not? I don't believe in God, right? So the Imam said, uh, were you ever so I'm going to read his exact words. Was there not in all the black displayer a glimmer of hope in your heart that some unnamed and unknown power could still save you? And so basically, this was a question that Imam asked the atheist. Was there any situation ever in your life where you were about to give up, you were in despair, you were disappointed, dejected by everyone, and then but you still had that little hope in your heart that someone would still be able to save you and put you back on your feet? The man agreed, yes, there have been many moments like that. And the Imam said, well, that power is Allah. That is the proof that is how you can actually see whether or not Allah exists or an independent being exists or not. Number third is which we had actually gone through the logical proof, but this is just another way to look at it. Um, for existence of an object, basically there can only be two possibilities: it created itself or it was created. Um, Now, if we consider our first possibility, which is created itself, that in other words, it means self creation. Now, self creation is a word that would mean that, okay, an object created itself, but because it created itself, it had to be created first. So, Ray, is just like the chicken and egg theory, which came first. Um, the self creation is not possible. This is meaningless. How can self creation be possible? How can a person mm, who's created is creating itself? Cannot be the creator because it wasn't even created by definition. So we can cross out the first one, and that cannot be possible. It was created, yes, okay, so that seems logical, plausible, yes. Nothing can come into being out of nothing, but the alternative is that something can be created if there is a creator, right? So we basically can say that anything that has a beginning, logically, we can say that anything we're trying to uh, define how something can be created. It can. What are the properties that define that something can be created? If something has a beginning and an end, then that means that it has a creator as well. That means something was there that was pre-existing to that creation and that created it. And that someone certain something is what we refer to as the independent being. Now consider an experiment for that, experiment of a fishbowl. So let's say you have a fishbowl, you have water in it, but nothing else. Will there be anything else if you just put it on the table? No, until you put a fish into it, there will be nothing. So basically what I'm trying to say here is that um, it's just like the fish bowl in our space and time existence. Like space and time is like our fish bowl, and we are, until there is a creator who puts us into the fish bowl or time and space, we cannot magically appear in the fishbowl. These were really the three main approaches that we were trying to study today. I'm sure you were able to understand and follow along. I just wanted to wrap today's sessions with an interesting thing that I think will be interesting for you guys as well. It's called the golden ratio. It's something to do, and I think it's related to this topic because Allah Ta'ala, as we read in the verse, to look around yourself, look at their everyday life, and try to see what those signs are trying to tell you. So this is like a mathematical number. It's called the golden ratio, and we're trying to analyze like what is this number. It says, so if you in maths we have this concept of golden ratio. Um, and basically, if you can see, if there is a line and the long part of it is, let's say, is a meters or whatever unit it is. Let's say centimeter, a centimeter long, and the short part of it is b centimeter long. Then the ratio of a and b will give you, let's say, this number. How will it give you this number? There's a certain condition, but we have seen that when that ratio is equal to 1.618, which is the golden ratio, then everything is very symmetric. And we have seen that that number displays or manifests itself in geometry, in nature, in art, in architecture. And some artists and architects out there actually also believe that this number, which is known as the golden ratio, makes objects beautiful and pleasing for the eyes, right? And what is now interesting about it is that there is a series called Fibonacci series. This is also pretty popular in mathematics, where we see that Fibonacci series has some relationship with this golden ratio. So basically, just I'm just trying to put it out there so that we know like there is certain significance of this ratio in maths, and it's not a random number. It's not a brainchild of one scientist or something like that, but it has some relationship, and it's somewhat magical, if you will. So, for example, Fibonacci series, we know how Fibonacci series is formed. You basically have zero, and then starts with one, and then you keep on adding the last or the preceding two numbers to actually form the next number. So 0 plus 1 is 1 plus 1 is 2, 2 plus 1 is 1 plus 2 is 3, and so on and so forth. Now, when we take any two successive Fibonacci numbers, so for example, let's say 2 or 3, and we divide them, the ratio is actually very close to golden ratio. And you can try with any of these two successive numbers in the Fibonacci series, and you'll be surprised how they actually are very, very close to 1.618, which is the golden ratio. Now, what does it have to do with the science and with our discussion of with like try to analyze and contemplate things around yourself to see the presence of God? Well, look at the rose flower. The petals of a flower actually follow this ratio. So if you basically see the number of petals on a flower, for example, will often be a Fibonacci series. And like I said, Fibonacci series, and the ratio of successive numbers is the golden ratio. Then the seeds on the right side, you can see the seeds of a sunflower. They also are twist and opposing spirals of Fibonacci series. There are other examples out there as well. You'll see the number of ridges in a peeled banana will usually be a larger Fibonacci number. There are stuff out there that actually follow the golden ratio. But what does it have to do with the existence of God? Well, it's it's a number that cannot be counted. It's limitless, right? The scientists have agreed that it is an irrational number. This ratio doesn't stop at 1.618, but the numbers just go on and on and on. They're still, it's an irrational number. It cannot be counted. So now, an interesting bit is when we go and analyze Quran in one of the verses, um, this is what Allah says, and we say 1.618. Remember that ratio. I will not be mentioning the chapter number, but anyways, Allah Ta'ala is saying in His verse, if you should count the favors of Allah, you could enumerate them. You could not enumerate them. Indeed, Allah is forgiving and merciful. Now, it probably is a coincidence, but this is chapter number 16, and verse number is 18, and we know like 1.618 is an irrational number, phi, or the golden ratio. So it's interesting to know that chapter number 16, verse number 18 is actually talking about the favors of Allah, and He's saying that it cannot be counted, just like how the digits of the golden ratio cannot be counted. So this was an interesting bit, and I'd like to conclude our session tonight at this point. Just to recap, we were able to go through the logical framework today. We were able to go through the other three approaches to look at the existence of God. Hopefully, that has given some answers that are always in the back of our mind, that is always a topic of discussion among friends and family. And I'd like to announce something for tomorrow. We will not be having this regular session. Tomorrow, we are going to be hosting a program with young kids. They will be given an opportunity to speak on one of the two topics for about 3 minutes. And we will have Jerry Heather as guest there as well. And then at the end of that session, um, there will be monetary rewards for the kids for coming up and participating in the program. This program will be organized obviously by Ilm Management Society. Please make sure if you are able to attend, please do attend and encourage the young kids who will be preparing their speeches. And definitely, I'm very excited to be hosting that program and to listen to what our youth is preparing, to listen to their point of view. The topics are really interesting. It's and Yeah, looking forward to that session tomorrow. Inshallah, at the same time, starts at 10 a.m. and it's probably going to go for 40-45 minutes, inshallah. Um, but yeah, thank you. It has been a pleasure. Jerry Heather is the guest, like I said, for tomorrow's program. Um, So yeah, like I said, it will start at 10 p.m. tomorrow, and please make sure if you're able to attend, do attend, and encourage the kids who will be there to talk on those topics. And like I said, thank you so much for attending these sessions. It was a pleasure. It's gonna actually start at 9:30 p.m. We will make sure that everyone is there right on time, and inshallah ta'ala, it will be broadcasted live, just like all of these sessions. So again, the time is 9:30 p.m. tomorrow. But again, thank you so much for attending the session today and all those previous sessions. The program will also be, by the way, broadcasted on Kime TV, and there will be gifts and prizes for the kids. So again, the session tomorrow is going to start at 9:30 p.m. on. It will be broadcasted on Kime TV as well. There will be gifts and prizes for kids who've participated, and president of Babel Ilm will actually also come in at the end and deliver a quick speech on how these programs were conducted, and will give you some important updates as well. So please do make sure that you tune in and participate in the program and encourage our youth on this great opportunity presented by Bubble and Society here. Thank you so much. This is the end of our tonight's session. Inshallah, I'll see you tomorrow at 9:30 p.m. Until then, Allah Hafiz. Take care.